They called him a coward. They called him a drunk. But they forgot one thing. Even a dead fire has one ember left to burn. The last shot of Old Man Fitz. Chapter 1. Ashes of the Past. The sun in Redemption Gulch wasn't a source of life. It was a judgment. It beat down on the town like a blacksmith's hammer on a rusted anvil, flattening the spirit of every man, woman, and child cowering in its dusty borders. This was a town bleached of color, bleached of hope, and bleached of courage. The dust, fine as bone ash, coated everything. It silted the horse troughs, ghosted the windows of the general store, and settled permanently in the throats of its inhabitants. But the sun was only the town's second worst enemy. The first had a name: Silas Blackwood. Blackwood was the shadow that the sun couldn't burn away. He and his band of enforcers, thugs who mistook cruelty for strength, had seized the town's silver mine, its only artery of life, and bled it dry. Fear was the only currency Blackwood traded in. To look him in the eye was an invitation to a beating. To speak out was an invitation to a shallow grave in the arid hills. And so, Redemption Gulch became a town of silence, a town of averted gazes, hunched shoulders, and whispers that died before they could become words. In this landscape of quiet damnation lived a man who was the town's living ghost, Arthur Act Fitzwilliam. No one called him that. He was, and always had been, Old Man Fitz. Fitz was a fixture, as permanent and as overlooked as the leaning telegraph pole by the saloon. He was a drunk, a ruin of a man who spent his waking hours propped against the saloon wall, his world blurred through the bottom of a cheap whiskey bottle. His beard was a matted tangle of gray, his clothes stiff with grime, and his eyes, when visible, were a bloodshot map of sorrows. What the town didn't know, or had chosen to forget, was that the bottle wasn't the cause of his ruin. It was the refuge. Years ago, Fitz had been a different man. A man with a steady hand, a quick eye, and a wife named Clara. He had been a U.S. Marshal. But on a day much like this one, hot and hopeless, he had been too slow. A bank robber's stray bullet meant for him had found her instead. He hadn't just lost his wife, he'd lost his nerve, his purpose, his very soul. He traded his badge for a bottle and had been drowning in that dusty saloon ever since. The townspeople held him in contempt. To them, he was a coward, a living symbol of their own silent surrender. Only one person in Redemption Gulch ever saw him as human: Ilara. She was a girl of 10, daughter of the town's late tailor, left with nothing but her mother's grief and a threadbare shop. Ilara, unlike the adults, had not yet learned that hope was a dangerous thing. Sometimes, on her way to the mercantile, she would stop. She would silently place a small piece of bread or a water skin near Fitz, never saying a word, her eyes offering a simple but devastating kindness that Fitz couldn't bear to meet. He would only grunt, pulling his hat lower, the gesture slicing him deeper than any insult could. The night this all changed, the air was thick and stagnant, holding the day's heat like a shroud. Inside the saloon, the air was sour with sweat and stale beer. Fitz was in his usual corner, half slumped, lost in the amber void of his glass. Then it came. A scream. It wasn't a shout, it was a raw, piercing sound of pure terror that sliced through the night, shattering the town's practiced silence. It was Ilara. It was followed by the splintering of wood and the booming, cruel laughter of men, Jed and Bull, Blackwood's two most brutal enforcers. They'd come to collect on the tailor's old debts, which meant seizing the shop and everything in it. Inside the saloon, every man froze. Cards stopped shuffling. Glasses paused mid-air. Every eye darted to the doorway, wide with a familiar, sickening fear. They saw Jed, a scarred mountain of a man, dragging Ilara by her thin arm. Bull, a sneering hyena, was kicking at the remnants of the tailor's front door. "Please," Ilara cried, her voice cracking. "It's all we have." "Shut your mouth, brat," Jed snarled, raising a hand to strike her. The town held its breath and did what it always did. Nothing. The bartender turned, polishing a glass with sudden, intense focus. The card players stared at their hands as if they held the secrets of the universe. They were all profiles of cowardice, desperate to unsee, to unhear. But in the darkest corner, the ghost stirred. Old man Fitz's head, usually slumped in a stupor, slowly lifted. His glazed eyes struggled to focus on the scene outside the door. He saw the girl. He saw her small hands batting uselessly at the brute's arm. And in that moment, the fog of whiskey burned away, replaced by a cold, white-hot clarity. He saw Clara. He saw the stray bullet. He saw the life he failed to protect. Not again. The single primal thought echoed in the wasteland of his mind. Never again. A low growl rumbled in his chest. His hand, shaking with a tremor that was not from drink, but from a decade of suppressed rage, moved. It didn't reach for his bottle. It reached deep inside his tattered coat. He pulled out a single-shot antique Colt revolver. It was old, the metal worn smooth, but the action was clean, oiled. It was the only piece of the Marshal he had allowed himself to keep, a relic of a life he had failed and a promise he had broken. With a groan of joints stiff from disuse, old man Fitz pushed himself up from his stool. The movement was agonizing. The sound of his chair scraping the floorboards echoed like a cannon shot in the dead-silent saloon. Every patron stared horrified, not at the thugs, at Fitz. They thought he was about to get himself and perhaps all of them killed. He stumbled, shuffling toward the door, not a hero marching to battle, but a drunk walking to his own grave. He reached the doorway, a stooped silhouette against the violent scene outside. His voice, when it came, was a dry rasp, weak and cracked with whiskey and disuse. Let her go.
Chapter 2. When the bell shatters. Jed and Bull paused. They turned, their expressions shifting from cruelty to confusion and then to pure, barking amusement. They saw the town drunk, swaying in the doorway, a pathetic figure clinging to the frame. "Well, well, if it ain't old man Fitz," Jed sneered, his voice booming. He contemptuously shoved Ilara to the ground. She crumpled in the dust, sobbing. "Come to finally join us, old-timer, or did you just spill your whiskey and wander off?" Bull, the hyena, drew his own pistol. aiming it lazily at Fitz's chest. "Go on, Fitz. Shuffle back to your bottle before you get hurt. This ain't your business." Fitz ignored them. His entire world had shrunk to 2 points, the terrified girl on the ground and the burning shame in his own gut. His eyes fixed on Ilara, curled in the dust, her small body trembling. The sight was a hammer blow, shattering the last of his apathy. His hand, which had been hidden by his side, came up, slowly, deliberately. He revealed the antique Colt. It was a movement so unexpected that for a split second, the laughter died in Jed and Bull's throats. They stared at the relic, then back at the drunk holding it. "I said," Fitz repeated. His voice was different now. The whiskey rasp was gone, replaced by something cold, something steady, something that had not been heard in Redemption Gulch for 10 long years. "Let her go." Jed recovered his bravado first. He scoffed, a deep, ugly sound. "And what's an old drunk gonna do with that museum piece, Fitz? You gonna shoot us with a prayer? You probably can't even see straight." He took a menacing step forward, puffing his chest out. "You're a coward, Fitz. Always have been." The word coward hit Fitz, but it didn't wound him. It focused him. With a speed that defied his age, a speed that belonged to the Marshal he once was, Fitz raised the Colt. His arm, once shaking, was now as steady as granite. His bloodshot eye narrowed, finding a focus that was terrifying in its intensity. He did not aim at Jed. He did not aim at Bull. He aimed higher. He aimed at the heavy brass bell hanging above the mercantile, the one Blackwood's men rang mockingly every time they came to extort the town. Click! The single-action hammer of the Colt cocked back. The sound was small, mechanical, yet it echoed like a thunderclap in the absolute suffocating silence of the street. Every hidden eye, every cowering soul was now fixed on this impossible confrontation. Fitz exhaled, a long, slow breath that carried 10 years of failure with it. His finger tightened. Boom! The single shot was deafening. It ripped through the night, a flash of fire revealing Fitz's face, revealing not a drunk, but a grim executioner. The shot was perfect. The bullet struck the bell dead center. The heavy brass didn't just ring, it shattered. A spiderweb of cracks exploded outward, and the entire bell disintegrated, raining shards of metal onto the porch below with a sound like a broken chandelier. Jed and Bull froze solid, their faces, flushed with arrogance, drained to a sickly pale white. Their bravado evaporated like water on a hot skillet. This wasn't a lucky shot. This was a message. This was the shot of a marksman. They stared at the glittering fragments of the bell, then at the old man who stood unmoving, the barrel of his antique Colt still smoking. A new, terrible silence fell. The townspeople, hidden in the shadows, were breathless. They had just witnessed the impossible. But the confrontation wasn't over. It had just begun. Bull, the hyena, was the first to react, not with fear, but with a surge of panicked rage. He was a coward at heart, and cornered cowards are the most dangerous. He shot the bell, Bull stammered, his voice rising. "He's crazy." Jed, however, recovered faster. His eyes narrowed, a cruel intelligence returning. He had seen Fitz's gun. He recognized it. "A single shot," Jed said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He smiled, a terrible, sharp-toothed expression. "You just used your one and only bullet, old man." Jed's hand moved like a snake, drawing his own revolver from its holster. Bull, seeing his boss's confidence, grinned and raised his pistol again, his hand now steady. "You missed, you old fool," Jed sneered, taking a step closer, leveling his gun at Fitz's heart. Old man Fitz stood there, his smoking revolver useless in his hand, facing two armed and furious thugs. The flickering hope that had risen in the town just seconds before died instantly. Ilara let out a small, terrified sob. Fitz was a dead man.
Chapter 3: The Signal. The street was locked in a deadly tableau. Fitz disarmed, Jed and Bull victorious, the hidden town defeated once again. Jed savored the moment, relishing the return of fear to Fitz's eyes. But he didn't find fear. Old man Fitz did not flinch. He did not beg. He did not even look at Jed's gun. His gaze remained locked on Jed's eyes, cold, steady, and utterly devoid of fear. "That's right," Fitz said, his voice calm. "One shot. That's all I needed." Jed frowned, his finger tightening on the trigger. "What's that supposed to mean, old man? You're dead." "My shot wasn't a warning. It was a signal." He said it with such absolute, chilling confidence that Jed hesitated. Signal? Signal for what? Fitz's eyes slowly, deliberately moved past Jed. He glanced up toward the dark roof of the blacksmith shop across the street. Jed's confidence wavered. He'd lived by violence long enough to know when a man was bluffing. This did not feel like a bluff. Cursing, Jed's eyes flickered, following Fitz's gaze up to the rooftop. Bull, confused, looked up too. In that half-second of hesitation, that single moment of doubt, the world changed. It wasn't a sniper on the roof. It was something far more powerful. Creak. The sound came from the saloon door, directly behind Jed and Bull. Jed spun around. The saloon patrons, the men who had been cowering over their cards, were now standing in the doorway. They weren't armed with guns, but the bartender held a heavy, sawn-off bat. The card players held their chairs. Their faces were pale. They were visibly trembling, but they were standing. Scrape. From the alley by the mercantile, the blacksmith emerged, a huge man. He held the heavy forging hammer he used on anvils, its head gleaming in the moonlight. Click-clack. From the other side, the general store owner and his son stepped out, armed with pitchforks and axes. One by one, from every shadow, the silent town of Redemption Gulch emerged. They were a pathetic army. Farmers with sickles, women with cast-iron pans, old men with walking sticks. They were terrified, but the sound of that single, impossible shot, the sound of the bell of their oppression being shattered, had broken a spell. Fitz's one shot hadn't been a signal. It had been an inspiration. Jed and Bull looked around, their sneers vanishing, replaced by the wide-eyed panic of trapped animals. They were no longer two enforcers terrorizing a single girl. They were two men suddenly surrounded by 30 angry, desperate, and silent townspeople. Get back!" Jed stammered, waving his pistol at the crowd. But the crowd didn't move. They just stood, silent, watching. They had found the one thing stronger than their fear of Blackwood: their shame. "I think," Old Man Fitz said, his voice cutting through the tension, "that your business here is done." Jed looked at the blacksmith's hammer. He looked at the bartender's bat. He looked at the 30 pairs of eyes that were no longer averted. He did the math. He and Bull could maybe take down 2 or 3, but they would be torn apart before they got a fourth. With a curse that was choked with fear, Jed grabbed Bull by the arm. "We're leaving." But Blackwood," Bull whimpered. "Now!" Jed roared. They scrambled for their horses, holstering their guns, never turning their backs on the crowd. They mounted up and rode out of Redemption Gulch, not with a swagger,
but at a full, desperate gallop, disappearing into the night. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of awe. Slowly, the townspeople turned their gaze from the empty road to the old man in the saloon doorway. Fitz finally lowered his empty revolver. His hand was shaking violently now, the adrenaline fading, leaving the old, frail man behind. He looked at the faces of his neighbors, seeing them clearly for the first time in a decade. Ilara, no longer crying, ran to him. She didn't hug him. She just stood in front of him, looking up at his face with an expression of pure, unadulterated wonder. Old man Fitz looked down at her. He tried to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he simply, awkwardly, placed his free hand on her shoulder. No one cheered, no one spoke. But as old man Fitz turned and shuffled back toward the saloon, the crowd parted for him. The bartender, without a word, took the empty whiskey bottle from Fitz's usual table and replaced it with a clean glass of water. That night, one bullet didn't just change the fate of a town. It changed the way the world saw a quiet man. And, for the first time in 10 years, it changed the way a quiet man saw himself. Legends like this are born in silence. Subscribe and join us for the next tale.